from West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for the Legislature Today is provided by the following.
West Virginia University, online at wvu.edu. The High Technology Foundation, headquartered at the I-79 Technology Park in Fairmont, online at wvhtf.org.
At the Legislature today, it's crossover day, which means members of both chambers have plenty of work to do. Senators say they will complete their calendar of bills long before the midnight deadline, but the House came to a halt this afternoon as members of the minority teamed up with some Republicans in an effort to kill a controversial bill, reading all 41 pages of it on the chamber floor. That story, and we'll talk with the leader of an education organization about the major bills lawmakers have considered so far this session on the Legislature today. Good evening, I'm Ashton Mara. For the first time in more than 20 years, members of the legislature are on their way to overturning a gubernatorial veto. The last time such a vote was taken was in 1987 under the late Governor Arch Moore. The two-thirds vote of both chambers overturned his decision on a portion of the 1988 budget. Lawmakers this year have a slightly different situation on their hands as they consider a vote to overturn the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No changes, just a run-of-the-mill veto override.
Run-of-the-mill, huh? Okay.
Members of the House of Delegates voted this morning 77-16 to overturn the governor's veto of the 22-week abortion ban. In his veto message, Tomlin told lawmakers he does not believe the bill is constitutional. Overturning the veto takes only a simple majority vote of both chambers, which the House cleared with ease. The Senate, however, did not receive the House message on their action during the upper chamber's morning floor session and therefore did not consider the action today. Senate Majority Leader Mitch Carmichael says there is no time crunch for members of the chamber to vote to override the bill. They have until the end of the session to do so. As to the constitutionality of it, Carmichael says it's likely to be questioned.
This is a question that needs to be decided from a judicial perspective, and to simply say it's going to cost us, some amount of money, which will be very small compared to the impact on life and our entire state budget. So the cost of this is not a consideration in terms of our taking action on it.
House Majority Leader Darrell Coles is less certain of a judicial challenge, but believes the state should defend the bill.
I don't know if there will be a court challenge. There could be, there could not be. That's something in the future that we'll have to look at. But I'd expect we'll defend the state's position that we consider life important, and at the point of pain capability, it is in the state's interest to defend that life. And
Coles and other supporters say at the 22-week point, a fetus can feel pain, and therefore the state has a vested interest in protecting it. Opponents say the bill is unconstitutional because the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled a ban can only be allowed after viability, or the time at which a fetus can survive on its own outside the womb. Many doctors argue that point is 24 weeks. House Bill 2568, if approved in the Senate, will become law without the governor's signature. Today is day 50 in this legislative session, and for members, that means crossover day. By midnight tonight, all bills that have originated in the state Senate must be approved by that body, and the same in the House. In a moment, we'll detail the bills delegates debated and approved this morning, but first, we take a look at how things are progressing in the Senate. Members of the Senate voted on and approved more than a dozen bills today, including one to allow some local utilities out from under the Public Service Commission's oversight. The bill gives local governing bodies, like county commissions, the power to vote on rate hikes for their local public service district, but only affects 8 counties in the state. Those counties contain public service districts with the highest number of customers, including Berkeley and Raleigh. During their morning floor session, senators also delayed consideration consideration of two major pieces of legislation, Senate Majority Leader Mitch Carmichael.
We've done a great job of managing our calendar here this year. We only have 2 or 3 bills remaining before the midnight deadline tonight. That would be with regard to campaign finance and then the whole issue surrounding the Uber and the taxi cabs.
That bill, Senate Bill 585, would allow ride-sharing companies like Uber or Lyft to begin operating in West Virginia, but has also been expanded to release regular taxi cab companies from the oversight of the Public Service Commission for more flexibility. The Senate Judiciary Committee spent hours debating and amending Senate Bill 541 yesterday. The bill makes major changes to the state's election spending laws. As introduced, the bill would have permitted corporations to donate to individual candidates in West Virginia and removed all donation caps. Currently, a candidate can only receive a $1,000 donation from an individual, political action committee, party, or union. The current version of the bill, which has yet to be approved by members, would raise the contribution caps to $2,600, or the federal contribution limit. It also prohibits any union or corporation donations and requires third-party organizations to disclose the names of contributors. Yesterday during the meeting, Democratic Senator Corey Palumbo praised the committee and the majority party for working the bill so thoroughly.
The work that you've done on this since it was introduced in a manner that was quite honestly highly offensive to a lot of members of the Senate, not just in the Democrat Party, but I think a lot of people had a lot of discomfort about this bill, and I think that you've done a great job of talking to everyone about this and really producing a piece of legislation that can be supported by the vast majority of our body. I think it modernizes contribution levels to take into account what's happened since the last time we looked at these. And I think it does a lot to shed light on expenditures that are made in our state. So I think it's gone from, in my opinion, a very bad piece of legislation to really a very good, strong piece of legislation.
Carmichael is the lead sponsor.
This bill, more than any other measure that we take here, will allow for clean, honest, transparent, accountable elections. We can never stop the dark money. We can't shut it down, but we can make sure that it is disclosed who the contributors are to these entities. And furthermore, we want to put the candidate back in charge of their message. So often a candidate gets defined by some third-party entity that is just not proper. We believe that a candidate has the responsibility to present their message to the citizens and the voters and allow the voters to make the decision based on the message from the candidate.
Carmichael expects bipartisan support of the legislation. After a floor session that lasted almost until midnight last night, members of the House of Delegates got an early start this morning to pass a flurry of bills. Liz McCormick brings us a look at 4 of those bills, but first, a look at a proposed constitutional amendment that, if passed, increases tax exemptions for some homeowners.
House Joint Resolution 13 was first on the agenda. Delegate Eric Nelson of Kanawha County, the House Finance Chair, explains.
This is dealing with the homestead exemption increase. As amended yesterday, the $20,000 would increase to $40,000. And again, our homestead line item has not been increased since 1982. And I believe that the amendment also took away the county option and made this option of the authority. Mr. Speaker, I urge passage.
House Joint Resolution 13 passed 93-3. If this joint resolution passes the Senate, the question about increasing the homestead exemption would be on the ballot in the fall of 2016. House Bill 2148 relates to the state's open container laws. It creates a misdemeanor offense for having an open container of alcohol in certain areas of a vehicle, specifically in the driver's and passenger seats. The language is required by the federal government so the state can keep getting federal highway funds. Delegate Gary Howell of Mineral County supported the bill, but was concerned about cars without traditional trunks, like SUVs. Howell questioned the Judiciary Chair, Delegate John Schott of Mercer County.
Do we have anything in this if someone, say, collects beer cans for the aluminum and they put it inside the passenger compartment and there's residue in them? Are they breaking the law or not?
I don't think there's anything specifically exempting that, and I assume that if there's any residue of alcohol in them, they should put them in the trunk and not in the passenger compartment. Otherwise, they risk violating the statute.
So an SUV where you don't have a trunk, they would be risking breaking the law.
Once again, in an SUV, you have a luggage compartment. I think what this refers to is the passenger compartment. So I have an SUV. There's an area in the back of my SUV where I put all types of luggage, even trash. So that's where I would recommend you put it to avoid any misunderstanding.
Thank you.
House Bill 2148 passed 92-4. Delegate Ron Walters of Kanawha County is the lead sponsor of House Bill 2233. This bill would require legislative rules be reviewed 5 years after initial approval by the Legislative Rulemaking Review Committee and the Legislative Auditor's Office. Delegate Walters says this type of follow-up is very important.
This gives us a method by which we can go back, we can see the social impact of the rules we pass, and the economic impact of the rules we pass. We've never had such an opportunity. We had to rewrite sections of the whole code in order to take out all laws or either introduce bills to take out all regulations. I urge passage of the bill.
House Bill 2233 passed 95-0. House Bill 2939 requires the mandatory reporting of sexual offenses on school premises involving students. The bill is in part a response to an incident at Capitol High School in Charleston. The principal there was accused of knowing about an incident on campus, but not reporting it within the current legal time limit. The case against the principal, however, has been questioned because of confusion over the current law. The House Judiciary Committee discussed a loophole in state code where there is no specific requirement of certain personnel to report such incidents. The committee also updated the definitions of sexual offense and sexual abuse. The bill had bipartisan support in the full House, but some Democrats had some concerns. The bill requires an incident to be reported immediately, and a handful of Democrats were concerned this term "immediately" left the reporting requirement open for interpretation. Another concern related to the pressures this bill might bring on teachers. Democrat Peggy Smith of Lewis County told her colleagues it will be a nightmare.
I'm going to have to tell every teacher who comes to me, you got to report it, whatever it is. Don't risk not reporting it. I'm going to have to tell every principal that. They're going to overwhelm law enforcement. They're going to overwhelm the state police. They're going to overwhelm the system, and it's going to take a lot of time when they already have to report it. We already have a system that requires that we report, and it's rarely abused. And I think this is a terrible mistake.
Another Democrat, Delegate Sean Fluharty of Ohio County, however, fully supported the bill.
This bill was fully vetted in judiciary. Every scenario under the sun was brought up, many of which were repeated today on the floor, and the protections were weighed. Protections of the students that attend our schools and the protections of the teachers that run them. And we understand the value in protecting both of them, and we fully vetted it. As the bill is right now, if a teacher sees something, they have a duty to report to law enforcement. Many law enforcement are actually on campuses throughout our state, so their duty to report ends there. They report it to law enforcement then puts it in their hands because they're well-trained, established, and know what to do with the facts.
House Bill 2939 passed 86-9. House Bill 2688, a bill related to forced pooling, caused a storm on the floor. When companies prepare to drill a well, they create a giant rectangle of land parcels and then negotiate with each mineral owner within that rectangle for their gas rights. The bill allows companies to pool the mineral owners within that rectangle together to purchase their mineral rights. If they can get 80% of the owners in their parcel to agree to the drilling, the bill allows for the drilling to occur without the consent of the other 20%. Those 20%, however, are still required to be paid for their proportion of the gas drilled. Democrats and some Republicans are heavily against this bill because they say it forces eminent domain for economic development. Delegate Pat McGeehan of Hancock County strongly opposes the legislation and, to make his point, requested the clerk of the House read through the entire 43-page bill this morning. After an hour of reading, Speaker Armstead gave the House 4 hours to debate it, which lasted well into the afternoon. For West Virginia Public Broadcasting, I'm Liz McCormick in the House.
After only 2 hours of debate, the House approved House Bill 2688 by a vote of 60 to 40. Our coverage continues in a moment. First, here's a look at what's coming up in the Senate tomorrow.
Up for passage in the Senate tomorrow, House Bill 2879, relating to certain limitations on the amount of state funds in any depository. Supplemental appropriations bills on second reading. These bills are at the request of the governor. House Bill 2760 to the Bureau of Senior Service Lottery's Senior Citizens Fund. House Bill 2764, the State Department of Education School Building Authority. House Bill 2770 to the Division of Human Services, and House Bill 2933, Department of Administration Public Defender Services.
This week, we've seen the movement of some major education reforms from both the House and Senate. Members of the upper chamber approved a bill allowing for charter schools, and in the House, delegates passed legislation to repeal the state's Common Core standards. Here this evening to talk about those bills and the implications for the state's education system is Christine Campbell. She's the president of the American Federation of Teachers West Virginia chapter. Christine, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with charter schools. It was approved in the Senate earlier this week. Democrats against it, Republicans overwhelmingly for it. Are you satisfied with the bill that was approved?
We have been talking about charter schools on and off for 5 years. We know that when this legislation was brought up, there were a lot of problems with it. We know that some amendments were made, some attempts to make more amendments were made, and we came out with a bill that was better than the bill we started with, but we still have serious concerns with it. So as it moves over to the House, and it has moved over to the House, we're going to work with the Education Committee over there and try to ensure that if we are going to allow 2 charter schools each year for the next 5 years, that we make sure that there is some oversight and accountability, that we are ensuring that the idea for flexibility and creativity doesn't turn into what's happened in other states across the country, which is mismanagement and fraud.
I want to talk about some of those concerns because this idea of oversight as far as education goes, Senator Bob Plymel has said the OEPA, the Office of Education Performance Audits, this office in the Department of Education that audits all of the schools, all of the county systems, they should oversee charter schools as well, and he doesn't think this bill is clear. Do you agree with that stance? Is OEPA, the Department of Education, are those the appropriate bodies to oversee public charter schools?
Well, they oversee the traditional public schools, and when you're looking at, a performance has to be made. The county board is still responsible for the performance of the charter school, but they don't have any authority over the charter school. So they are under the restrictions of OEPA to have someone to come in and look at the traditional county schools and say, this is what you need to be doing, and are you doing that? So the charter school bill, it would stand to reason that you would want the same group assessing the same schools or auditing all the schools in the county so that you can actually compare apples to apples.
I think OEPA is an office that not a lot of people know about. So we've established that they oversee educational standards. Do they oversee finances as well? Senator Bob Beach was very concerned about the finances of these public charter schools.
They go through an entire audit of the schools. So they sit down, and I've been through these as a teacher too, that they go through the school and they talk to the teachers about what's happening in their classrooms and procedures and instructional strategies and those kind of things. But they also talk with the office personnel about keeping minutes for faculty senate and how to regulate their budget and what they're supposed to do. So each piece of the finances that are in a school, they go through how you need to report things, and look at that to make sure that you're balancing those school budgets as well as the county.
So the House Education Committee could take up the bill as soon as this evening?
They could, yes, because they were on the floor and they do plan to have a committee meeting. The OEPA is just one of the things that we would like to see oversight in the bill. There's also some other things that we want to make sure. The conversion of charter schools, if you take a traditional public school and you convert it to a charter, it requires a vote. But we currently have innovation zones in West Virginia that also requires a vote. That language requires a vote of all the people who are affected by the conversion of the school.
The public school conversion, language. Right, you have to have 60% vote of the teachers and then 60% petition by the parents and school personnel?
Yes, and not school personnel, by the parents. But in the innovation zones to convert, and we had amendment, I know Senator Plymel was, worked on that amendment, and the organizations worked with him on that. Well, actually contributed and said, yes, this makes sense because we already have innovation zones. So why not use the same process for a conversion? Because the school service personnel, the custodians, the secretaries, the cooks, were left out of the voting process. So that is a real concern for us, because if you're going to convert a school to a charter school, everyone who is affected by that change should have a voice in whether or not the conversion goes.
So on top of charter schools, you all are also following a major change to the state's content standards. We should say that on Saturday, the House passed a bill that would repeal Common Core standards in math and English. That bill has since changed as it's working its way through the Senate, and they're giving an extra year until 2016 to repeal and write new standards. But the state superintendent says that's a heavy lift to do in a year. Can it be done?
Well, I know that it wasn't done previously that way. I know that they spent a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of resources to have teachers involved, to go through each piece of it and what does this look like. And I do believe that even putting it off a year, it still repeals the standards. So what are we going to have? We already know that the current standards are at least 75 to 80% of the previous standards. So if we're really going to look at the Common Core, West Virginia's next generation standards, what we should be doing is looking at reviewing the implementation. Because anyone who has an issue with the standards, I don't think it's about the standards themselves, it's about the implementation. And I've talked with the State Board and the State Department about what happened in that implementation and how this is an opportunity to do it correctly.
By implementation, do you mean the professional development, the training that teachers are getting to teach these standards?
The professional development, the training, they started out very rigorous and engaging a lot of teachers doing, and I think we've gotten to a place now where there is a lot more job embedded professional development surrounding the Common Core. But they didn't have materials, they didn't have instructional materials, they didn't have an in-depth training, and now that we've been doing this for 4 or 5 years. I mean, Putnam County was a pilot school. They have been waiting on a test that's actually aligned to the standards because they've been they have implemented the standards for several years now. It's working, but they don't have a test aligned to that. So we're still in the process of making sure everything is in sync, and to change it just puts us back. But the biggest problem with that is you set the whole process back, you're setting those kids back. Right. What happens to the students while you go through this process all over again?
A very complicated issue. We should say that bill still has to go to Senate Finance and to the full Senate, so possibilities for changes, but I guess we'll see. Christine Campbell with the AFT, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now here's a look at what's coming up in the House tomorrow.
There are no bills up for passage in the House tomorrow. Among the bills on second reading, Senate Bill 351, to increase funding amounts at which charitable organizations are required to provide a professional audit or financial review and to clarify filing requirements. Senate Bill 374, to allow in absentia parole hearings in certain instances and waiving a personal appearance by an inmate who is terminally ill and unable to attend. Senate Bill 375 to specify who receives notice of parole hearings via regular or certified mail. Law enforcement officers involved in investigating the parolee's crime will be notified by regular mail. Prosecuting attorneys, judges, and crime victims will be notified by certified mail. Senate Bill 507 to allow emails and other types of electronic communications to and from regional jail inmates be monitored, intercepted, recorded, and disclosed. The bill provides an exception for attorney-client privileged communication. And Senate Bill 559 to clarify the exemptions provided by statute for social work licensing.
This has been the Legislature Today. This program reminder, we will provide live coverage of a public hearing tomorrow morning in the House chamber. At issue is Senate Bill 35 to provide that any person 18 years of age or older may carry a concealed weapon without a license. Our coverage begins at 8:30 on West Virginia PBS 2. The state of preparedness that Governor Tomlin issued yesterday is still in effect. Snow and ice are melting across the state. Heavy rainfall today will give way to large amounts of heavy, wet snow overnight. The weather may leave neighborhoods without power and other utilities. Widespread flooding is being reported throughout the state. I'm Ashton Mara. Thanks for joining us. Good night.
Support for the Legislature Today is provided by the following.
West Virginia University, online at wvu.edu. The High Technology Foundation, headquartered at the I-79 Technology Park in Fairmont, online at wvhtf.org.